Welcome back to another episode of the CSK8 podcast. My name is Jared O'Leary. In this week's episode, I interview Clark Merkley. In our discussion, we chat about what Clark has learned over the years working with administrators across the nation who are interested in implementing CS education in their district. This episode would be an excellent episode to share with administrators who are kind of on the fence about CS education or are unsure where to start, and it pairs nicely with the interview with Diane O'Grady-Cuniff, which is episode 15. Now, I will say from a personal note that Clark is my boss and he is a wonderful human being, and I have enjoyed working with him for the last couple of years. He's very humble about his background. For instance, he doesn't mention that he knows several foreign languages and used to teach foreign language at the university level, and he truly is passionate about helping other people through education. If you're a CS educator who is listening to this, I hope you consider sharing this episode with your administrators or administrators in neighboring districts who might have some questions about getting started with CS4All in their schools. For example, Clark mentions several ways that you can obtain funding, including applying for the Amazon Future Engineer plus Boot Up initiative, which Clark talks about 3/4 of the way through and can be found at bootuppd.org or by visiting the show notes at jaredoleary.com. I hope you enjoy this episode, and we will now begin with Clark introducing himself.
So I'm Clark Merkley, Executive Director of Boot Up Professional Development, and I've been involved with Boot Up really since the beginning, since it was an idea of Ari Ioannidis, who's our founder and board president. It's been exciting to see how it's evolved from that idea to what it is now become, which is a very effective method for school districts to get their teachers trained and get them confident and self-efficacious as teachers of coding.
And if you'd write a book about your journey into your current position, what would the titles of the chapters be?
You know, I can see the first chapter would probably be something like Budding Young Scientist, because as I went into undergraduate work, I thought I would be a research scientist or maybe a college professor. I thought about medicine and optometry and some other things. The second chapter would probably start off or be entitled Budding Young Healthcare Attorney, because I met a hospital attorney and I thought, you know, that's a really cool job, having command over a specialized body of knowledge, taking something that's very complex and making it easy for people to understand, and helping healthcare organization do its work and do good in the community. And then I transitioned from that into working for a national health insurance company. And I was traveling one day with my wife, and we were driving through the Florida Keys, and I said to my wife, I'd like to teach. And she said, well, you know, you've always talked about at the end of your career, maybe being a university professor or something like that. And I said, no. I said, I want to teach now. I don't want to wait till the end of my career. And, you know, I wasn't really thinking about university. And she said, well, what are you thinking? Are you thinking about being an elementary teacher? And I said, no, because the kids, they love their teachers. They think they're perfect. And there's not a lot of challenge there. And she said, well, are you thinking about high school? And I said, no, because the kids are, you know, pretty much decided whether they're going to go to college or whether they're not going to go to college. And she said, are you out of your mind? You want to teach junior high? And I said, yeah. I said, I think there's an opportunity there to influence students to become lifelong learners. And I like the challenge of being a junior high teacher. I had some very influential teachers when I was about that age that made me take my academic studies more seriously and introduced me to some topics and some areas that I was really interested in for the rest of my life. So that began a process where I left a corporate healthcare job and moved into teaching junior high. My first year of teaching junior high, I taught 3 sections of algebra, 2 earth science sections, and then a physical science section. I guess that next chapter would be junior high teacher. And then after I'd done that for a few years, the district office recognized that I had some abilities in human resources and employee benefits. And so I moved into the district office in an administrative position in human resources and got to understand how districts operate, how decisions get made, working closely with the board of directors or the board of education, and seeing how things get accomplished in a fairly large school district. This district has over 30,000 students. After that, I did a few other things in the corporate world and eventually went to work for Emerald Data Solutions. And they produce Board Docs, which is a board management software solution used by about 1,500 school districts around the country. And so I was back in the education space, working with superintendents and board members and executive secretaries to the board, and really enjoyed that experience. And then Board Doc started the Give Back Initiative, which later became Boot Up. And so I transitioned from one thing to the next, and now in a position where we're doing some amazing things in the world, advancing computer science education with elementary students. And we do that primarily by empowering their teachers. And that's been very gratifying work, as we've seen teachers that were not only very intimidated by computer science and coding, but also lacked tremendous confidence in their own ability to do that, even though they were very good teachers, great rapport with their students. And we know from our experience that if you start with a great teacher who already has a relationship with students, we can provide them with the professional learning they need to be very good, very confident, and self-efficacious teachers of coding.
So a lot of the teachers who are going into CS education, sometimes they have expressed how expectations and reality have not always aligned in terms of advanced expectations and what it's actually like in the classroom. I'm curious, when you first began working as a teacher, what was something that you believed that you no longer believe after having had experience in the classroom?
I went into education with the belief that some students are going to be hard to reach and some students are not going to perform well. And so I kind of went in with this expectation that, I would have to live with a certain level of disappointment. And there were a couple of experiences that I had early on in my teaching that really made a difference for me. And the first one was teaching a science class, and it was a required class for eighth graders. And not all the eighth graders were excited to be there. And I saw my role as a science teacher in particular being someone who would keep the kids engaged and excited about real life applications of science, not only in current events that were going on in the world, but in the natural phenomena that were taking place around them. And so I tried to weave in a lot of those things into the daily classes, and including a lot of hands-on laboratory activities and other things where they could see the application of science in their life. And I had one girl in particular, her name was Sarah, and she came in and we somehow got talking one day, one of the first weeks of school, and she said, "I hate science. I've always hated science. I wish I didn't have to take this class." And so during the course of that semester, and then I met with her parents during parent teacher conference, and they would say, she really loves your class. She went into it with some fear, and she really didn't like science, but she comes home almost every day talking about something you've said or something you've done or something they've learned in class, and she's really really getting excited about science. And so to see that one student, and she's just an example of many others who, you could tell by the looks on their faces, the first few days of class, they were not really excited to be there.
Right.
But then to see them perk up and contribute and do some really fun, creative things and join in on some of the quirky activities, it gave me hope for not only, individual students, but really for all of my students, that I could be effective in reaching them at a time in their life when perhaps education wasn't the main event for them. A lot of them were going through, social pressure. Where do I belong? Who are my friends? What's going to be my relationship with my parents? And I felt if I could keep them hanging in there and committing to learning things over a lifetime, that I would be successful as a teacher. And so a few years later, I ran into Sarah's mother at a local grocery store, and she said, "I just have to let you know that Sarah is in college now, and she's majoring in nursing, and she's even thinking about maybe she will apply for medical school one day." And I thought, gosh, how wonderful to take this girl. She was very bright and very, passionate, but to have her go from hating science to now pursuing a full-time career in a pretty intense scientific field, just it kind of reinforced all those good feelings I had about the difference that I could make in a classroom.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in the same community where I taught, and I would often see my students at the gas station or the grocery store or the movie theater. And if I happened to bump into a student and it was close to their home, they would often invite me to come over and meet their parents.
Mm.
And sometimes I would see the very humble circumstances that my students were living in. And it gave me a great appreciation for the courage and the persistence that these students showed, because I now had a better understanding of some of the challenges that they were facing at home, and to see how well they did in school, and how, even going to school was a challenge every day. It really opened my eyes. So I think I went into teaching very idealistic and very, I can do some great things and change the world. And I did not leave jaded. I left with, reinforcing that original thought. I mean, my reality was nowhere near that idealistic picture I had of what a teacher is like and what kind of an effect a teacher can have. But I do know that I was able to make a difference in the lives of my students, and, hopefully put them on a path to lifelong learning.
So, how has your experience working with districts across the nation kind of reaffirmed or changed your own understandings of CS education, or just even education in general?
Yeah, we've had a chance to talk with administrators from districts all over the country, from Alaska to the city of New York to small rural communities. And one of the things that I'm encouraged by is what I hear in those conversations is a true passion for student success. They want their students to be successful in all aspects, not just academic, but socially, and especially as they advance in their K-12 education, to be prepared for life and careers and future education. And that's almost universal, from, the very, very large school districts down to the very small. And so that's been very encouraging to see. I think one of the things that has been a little bit more challenging is, as a nonprofit focused on coding and computer science education, we have a true passion, because we know that the teachers who receive our training transform dramatically in terms of their level of confidence. They go from being completely fearful and intimidated about their ability to do coding, and then once they realize, one, that it's not as difficult as they originally thought, and second, that it really is engaging for the students,
Mm.
and that they can incorporate that right into the things that they're already doing with language arts and mathematics and science and social studies and other topics, that we just see really wonderful things happening with teachers. And then correspondingly, when they are working with their own students, we see amazing things happening with the students, which is really the main point, is, getting students interested in computer science and coding, and doing that by creating that engagement and excitement and confidence with the teachers. So that part has been very gratifying. I think the one thing that I still have hope for, and that is that district administrators will see how important it is to get this literacy into the hands of their students, particularly at the elementary level. They don't all have to go into computer science, and they don't have to even take AP computer science as an elective in high school. But when they learn to think computationally, and they learn to think rhythmically, meaning they learn to think in terms of clear instructions and patterns, and also the creativity and the design thinking that comes along with coding, will benefit them in almost every academic subject that you can imagine. And so we can see that connection, and sometimes it's difficult helping administrators understand that when they have so many things going on in their district.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier to, at least I think it's a lot easier now to convince administrators, now that we have evidence and data from external sources kind of validating what we've been doing the last couple of years. Whereas at the beginning, it was like, well, what we're doing is based on research, but we don't have research on the effects yet.
Yeah, and now that we've been doing our own collection of data and analysis, and we're able to show that, and that makes a big difference, because it's something like this, where even though computer science has been around for decades, and it's been, brought to a very high level in the workforce, it still has not made its way into K-12 education to the extent that it needs to be.
Mhm.
And so our experience and the data that we've been able to collect and analyze, and now finding its way into research publications and other places, does show, one, that our professional development is is critical to getting that teacher confidence, which I think is good news for a school district, because if you think that I've got to go into a college or a university setting and try and recruit computer science majors to go into teaching, I think what we've established is, no, you can take people that really want to be elementary education teachers, give them the additional knowledge and skills and training and support, and they can be very, very good coding and computer science teachers at the elementary level. That's the part that's, I think, difficult for someone who's maybe going into computer science as a major to think along those lines.
Mhm.
They're mostly thinking like, how is this going to help me advance in my career as a software engineer or developer? Whereas those that go into the teaching professions, typically they're there because someone has been a great influence in their life as a teacher, and they want to replicate that same feeling that they had from a teacher who saw potential in them. So we've demonstrated that that model works, so that you don't have to worry like, I've got to go hire computer science experts to teach kids. I can take a really good teacher and help them be a really good coding and computer science teacher.
And you don't run into the issue of, how do I convince this person to cut their pay in half?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and most people, they wouldn't make that jump.
So if you had a close friend who was a district administrator and really wanted to get started with CS education in their district, what advice would you give them?
Well, I have this conversation quite often, either with people that I've worked with in administration or people that have become friends. What I typically like to do is say, let me have you come and watch this in action. Because it's one thing to tell somebody, if you introduce computer science at the elementary level at your school, you're going to see a lot of great things happening. First and foremost, what you're going to see is a tremendous commitment to equity, meaning you don't have to wait until junior high and make this an elective offering and then hope that you can recruit the right students into the class or get a nice representation of your student body. If you do it at the elementary level where all students have access to it, you will find that some of the students that you might not have otherwise thought would be good at this are actually very good at it and love it. And so we've seen success with special education students, students on the autism spectrum. We've seen students who you might not otherwise think really have a gift for some kind of academic pursuit really blossom and really shine when it comes to coding and computer science. And sometimes it's just the way it appeals to them. They're very good at consuming code and consuming technology, and when we can introduce them to the creative powers of coding and let them, come up with their own creations and their own projects, it really sends a strong message to students. So that's sort of one thing that I can tell them, but I say, come and watch this in action. Nothing more magical than two things that we see and do. One is when our facilitators work with teachers and we see, especially that very first session where they come in with a lot of preconceived notions about how difficult coding is. I mean, some of them are thinking ones and zeros, binary code.
Right.
Some of them are thinking really complicated syntax, and then we take them through a process where we introduce them to Scratch, for example, where the way the introduction is typically done is we just have them open up Scratch and start playing around with some of the icons and seeing what they can do. And they're coding, but they have no idea that they're really coding until we stop and let them know that, hey, congratulations, you just created your first algorithm. And so I've had a chance to be with administrators in those settings with new teachers, and they say two things that are really critical. One is, this is great because it's hands-on. It's not just sit and get professional development, which that's kind of what a lot of our teachers think. And we know that kind of professional development or that kind of learning environment is not conducive to the best learning. It's when someone can learn in the context of actually doing it, and that's what we take a lot of pride in. And so that experience of seeing new teachers be introduced to coding and computer science and almost within minutes sometimes go from trepidation and fear to laughter and fun and engagement And then the next thing that we do that's really exciting to see is when one of our facilitators will do what we call model teaching. So you can sit in a classroom and sit in professional learning and you actually have hands-on experience. But then when you get to see someone teaching your own class of students, and you know those students very well, you know their tendencies and their behavior and you know what kinds of things that they get bored with and what kinds of things they like. But so then to see someone who knows how to facilitate a coding lesson, do that with your very own group of students, that's where the real magic happens. Because then it's not an intellectual exercise anymore. It's like, okay, now I can see myself in that role, applying what I've just learned. And as we do the professional development over time, we'll come back every 6 to 8 weeks and reinforce what they've been taught and teach new concepts. And we see the teachers grow in confidence as they learn new skills and then watch them apply that in the classroom. That's what's really exciting. So I encourage my administrator friends is to see it in action, rather than just trying to experience it intellectually.
Yeah, my former superintendent, Dr. Betsy Hargrove, she did the same thing. So she would constantly have administrators from other districts just go into either my classroom or another coding teacher's classroom just to see, what does this look like? What does our professional development look like? And can this be done at this grade level? Because there is some hang up for some people in terms of thinking that coding or computer science is too difficult for younger kids.
Yeah, and we hear that a lot. And then I share with them my experiences of being in a kindergarten classroom and seeing the kids as they come into the room. They just almost sprint to the over part to pick up their iPads.
Yeah.
And run over and if they're already in the middle of a project, they just open up their iPad and they start working on their project where they left off. They can't even read yet, but they're doing fairly sophisticated coding work, at least as an administrator would think of it. That is really exciting. And it's not just playing around, because there's a lot of administrators, they think, well, we've got a computer lab, but the kids just go in there and goof around and look stuff up and play games and do other things. When you see a student that's actually working on something they care about, that's when it really, really gets exciting. And we had a story from one of our districts we work with in Iowa. A little third grade girl was working on a project in Scratch and went to the teacher and said, "Is there any way I can do a project to help my 5-year-old brother learn basic math?" And the teacher's like, "Well, I don't know. I guess you could. Why don't you give it a try?" So she runs over and she starts, heads down. She's working on this thing and, in classic elementary coding style, she's trying different things to see how they work and debugging and, redesigning and making it attractive and putting in positive reinforcements if you get the answers right. And the teacher, was kind of moved on with other things, didn't really think much about it. Comes back a few weeks later and said, "Well, how did that little project go about teaching your brother math?" And she said, "It's great. He's only 5 years old, but he knows all of his addition and subtraction for all the numbers 1 through 10. And the teacher says, "Well, show me what you've done." And so she had developed a little project that was kind of like a digital flashcard
Mm-hmm.
thing with some, animation to support it. And if he got the answers right, it gave him a little bell or a whistle or a hooray or something like that. And over the course of just a few weeks with his sister's application that she'd developed, he had learned basic math. And so one of the cool things that we see with computer science, especially when the students get to work on something that they're interested in, because the students, even as young, second, third, fourth graders, they already are interested in different things like pets and music and fashion and sports and their family and, the environment or, keeping their neighborhood safe and clean, whatever it is. When they're creating projects, they're using characters that appeal to them. So whether they're animals or family members, and so they're able to do projects with people or figures that they can relate with.
Mm-hmm.
It really heightens the level of engagement. And the cool thing is, maybe it's not so cool for the teacher who has to follow the coding lesson, but they get so excited about it, they don't want to leave. They don't want to, drop that off and pick up the next subject. So the really cool thing is when they get that level of engagement, and then if the teachers are trained and they can use what they've learned to integrate in across the curriculum, then it really becomes cool. We've seen some teachers do some amazing things with integrating coding into language arts and social studies and science and math and other areas where once the teachers have that confidence in their own ability and their students know, rather than doing, a book report, like, we're reading a new book and we're, starting with the title page and dissecting the novel and understanding the characters and at the same time learning spelling and grammar and usage. Well, if I give the students a coding project option instead of the traditional book report, I can still assess all those same things as a teacher.
Right.
Did they understand the plot and the characters, and did they understand the flow of the story? And if there were certain key vocabulary words that I wanted them to use in a book report, I could still make that same requirement in a coding project. They see the students really come to life for a couple reasons. One is they get a choice, and students always like to have a choice. Can I either do a written book report or I can do a coding project? But if for some reason that creative act of creating a little coding project really gets the students to think at a little bit different level and maybe using some other parts of their brain they might not typically use. So that's very exciting.
Now, what are some of the questions that you wish district administrators would ask you about getting started with developing or implementing CS education in their own schools or district?
Well, I guess the ones I wish they would ask is, and sometimes they do, how is this going to help my teachers? Kind of behind that question that I would like them to ask is the question that we typically hear is, or the statement is, our teachers have so much on their plate, they cannot do one more thing.
Right.
And so why would I have them try and do a computer science class too? That's an opportunity for me to kind of talk about, especially at the elementary level, coding as a literacy rather than as a separate class or a separate subject. And for many administrators, that's kind of a new revelation to them. I said, at the same time they're acquiring other languages like oral skills, written skills, and mathematical or numeracy skills, it's an ideal time to introduce them to some of the literacy that comes along with coding. And then, how can I help my teachers? That's what we'd really like to hear, is because then it comes from that lens rather than what I consider somewhat of an unfounded concern that the teachers can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather view it as like we can empower the teachers rather than try and protect them from something that might be upsetting to them. I've been an administrator before. I understand that. You don't want to overburden people or come up with the flavor of the day new program that we're doing. One of the things I wish there were more research out there right now is about the impact of getting introduced to coding early on other subject areas. My hypothesis is that if you learn to code and when you're in early elementary school, that it will help you in language arts and it will help you in mathematics to perform better, because you'll see connections and you'll see other ways of solving problems, and you will build in this resiliency or grit to keep at it. A lot of times when you do a program in scratch, it doesn't always work the way you want it to. In fact, it never does. You always have to try new things. I think students would perform better, but I'm still waiting for some really good, solid academic research to support that.
Yeah, and if at the very least, even if it doesn't increase the test scores, at least to be able to demonstrate, well, it doesn't lower the test scores either. So they still are performing at the expected level, even with the addition of working on computer science or coding in the classroom.
Yeah, I guess as a floor, because there is probably that concern in adding one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a couple of situations that, understandable, but also a little bit disappointing, where we've been working with districts, and as soon as they got their reading scores back on the standardized exam, they pulled the plug for those classrooms or those schools on computer science.
Mm-hmm.
And that's disappointing because, I'd like to think that certainly it's not hurting the students in any way. And, on the other end, that it's enhancing their ability to perform well on those things. There's so much public pressure for, getting reading scores and math scores to be at grade level or above some state norm, that it does unfortunately put a little bit more pressure on districts to think about introducing computer science and coding to their students.
Yeah, or even any subject area that's outside of what's tested. So, like in the arts, a lot of those classes also get pulled. It's just basically like, well, if it's not tested, then we're going to eliminate it from our school day because it essentially doesn't matter.
Those kinds of subjects do, I mean, one, they enhance the joy and the satisfaction of the students
Right.
if they can see a more broad-based approach. I think it adds to the richness and joy of an elementary student when they can do things other than just, read, write, and do math,
Mm-hmm.
that it enhances their entire experience, because those of us that have been, involved in those kinds of pursuits, either at leisure or professionally, know that those add real, richness and happiness to our lives. So it's important to have those at the elementary level as well.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's why I stayed in school was because of the subject areas that weren't being tested on. I mean, they were the ones that I enjoyed the most, but that's just my own anecdotal experience.
Yeah, I mean, as an elementary kid, my favorite subjects were lunch and recess, but you know, and I often ask other young students their favorite subjects. I get similar responses. So some things haven't changed in years.
Right.
The other cool thing that we see with coding that you may not see in other settings is there is a lot of collaboration that takes place. And I just finished reading a book called Coding as a Playground. And the thing I liked about the book was, they said a lot of us in education have done playground duty, or, something like that, where we had to monitor what was taking place on the playground. And what does that look like? And what does that sound like? And, teachers will say, well, like chaos, noisy, kids running around doing all kinds of things. And so if coding is a playground where it is a little bit noisy, it is a little bit chaotic, but you hear laughter, you see people talking with each other, you see students pursuing things that they really like and enjoy. What if you could capture that in an academic setting where they're learning something new and applying it? And of course, the opposite analogy is coding as a playpen, where I've set such tight restrictions and barriers that the students can't get out of. Typically, when you think of a playpen, you think, somebody's screaming and crying because they don't like it. Because you can find it. And, so a teacher has to take a more open view, because the most exciting coding classrooms that we go into, they're a little noisy and they're a little chaotic. And, people are talking and laughing and they want to share what they just did with a friend.
Right.
That's part of this social and joyful part of coding that I think for the students it really enhances their experience. With a good teacher, leader / facilitator, they can do some wonderful things.
So you had mentioned that we know of a district who cut back on computer science education because of they wanted to focus on test scores and other subject areas. I'm wondering if you have other regrets that some administrators have voiced about their approach to implementing CS education in their districts.
Yeah, I guess there are a couple of others, and one is, and it's kind of related to this idea of coding as a playground. If you feel like the teachers need to have a scripted plan laid out, this is what lesson you will teach at what time, and this is how it's going to go, and here's your lesson plan, and it's all set out. That kind of and I'll call it a boxed curriculum approach, for lack of a better term, it really doesn't serve the students well. It might be easier for the teachers because they don't have to do a lot of preparation or a lot of thinking or manage a little bit of chaos. They kind of follow the recipe, and and the students will follow along and do what they're told, or not do what they're told, whatever the case may be. So I worry a little bit about that there are some districts that in the desire to bring order and structure for teachers, squelch the creativity and learning opportunities for the students, just because they've have things too tightly scripted or too controlled. If that's the case, then typically it's a project where there is one end result that the students are trying to achieve, and there might be a couple different paths to get there, but the students' creativity and their ability to apply their own interests and to do a project where they're working on something they care about gets lost.
Right.
And so I guess that's another thing I'm concerned about, is just over structuring the coding and computer science, which you'll see that in other subject areas as well. I mean, you can acquire curriculum that is scripted right down to the almost to the minute of what's going to be done and what's going to happen in a class or during a particular classroom session. And it might have some cool audiovisual support or activities that go along with it, but it's a pretty scripted, recipe driven curriculum. I can't imagine. I mean, as a teacher, I never got excited about stuff like that. I can't
Right.
imagine that well, I mean, I know students don't like it because they're almost like, well, you're just following the book. You're just following. You're just you're not doing anything cool or creative.
Hmm.
You're not helping me understand this. So I guess that's something I also worry about, is just trying to make it too scripted for teachers rather than giving them the opportunity to let the students explore.
Yeah, I'm hoping that with the continued spread of culturally responsive pedagogy or teaching, that kind of gets rid of that. So I previously worked in a district, not Avondale, but one before that, where the PE teachers hit play on what I think was a cassette at the time, and it would just verbally dictate out what all the kids were supposed to do at that day on that lesson. So like there was no choice, no interests added to it. Everything was literally scripted, and every elementary teacher in the district was expected to hit play on the same cassette every week. And it was just a nightmare. The opposite of what try and do.
What a terrible, I mean, what a terrible student experience. But
Right.
you can't imagine the teachers really thought that was terribly worthwhile either. But
Right.
who knows?
From my perspective, it just completely got rid of any expertise that any of those educators could have provided in the realm of physical education, and just made them so that they were just going around just making sure people were stretching the right way or things like that. Like there was no autonomy or ability to kind of customize things to match the interests of the kids they were working with.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a huge push in education right now for personalized learning.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are still trying to figure out, what does that actually look like and how do we make it happen, and what implications does it have for teachers. But coding is a great example for that, because if you've got students that are working on something that they care about, by definition, they're just not going to be the same as the other students in the class. And the other thing that you mentioned culturally responsive curriculum. The cool thing about, when students do something they're interested in, they can do something that is a very personal interest to them.
Right.
And we often talk about in education, space, if I can't see it, I can't be it. Meaning, if I don't see somebody who looks like me that's doing what I like to do or what I want to do, maybe I can't be that person. And one of the cool things is, and it's really, I'll call it an unintentional benefit of what we're doing, and that is, in the professional ranks, women are underrepresented in the IT and technical fields. But at the elementary level, across the country, 90% of the teachers are women. And so when girls can see that their teacher, who looks like them, and maybe even racially looks like them, it can do something that they really like or that they find interesting, all of a sudden they've got that role model.
Right.
And they go, hey, if my teacher can learn this, I can learn this. And my teacher really seems to enjoy this. And so, that's something I might want to be interested in. We all know that when we have a teacher who's teaching a subject that they really love and they care about, it makes the whole experience more interesting.
Yep.
And it could be something you walked into the class and you didn't care anything about it. I remember I had an economics class in undergrad, and I was more tracked into the sciences and literature. But the teacher was so good, all of a sudden I'm like, I really like economics, because the teacher just had a fascinating way of tying in current events and real life and decision making and game theory and other things. I'm like, this is cool. And I think we see the same thing happening with coding, where the students can pick up on the excitement or lack of excitement of a teacher. And typically, when the teachers are learning something new, they're pretty excited about it, because they're gaining confidence in a skill they never thought they would have, and the students pick up on that, and that energy carries through.
Yeah, when I've had some friends who are district administrators in other districts kind of ask for my advice on this, if they should just start with every teacher in their school learning how to code and implementing CS education. Actually, that might make things worse in the long run, because if you start with teachers who are not interested in it and hesitant to begin with, and you put them in front of kids, it might just turn kids away from it. But if you start with a core group of volunteers who are already passionate about wanting to do that, then you can build off of that and grow from there.
Yeah, and we see that very often with the districts we work with. They may say, for example, we want to have you train our media techs because we don't want our classroom teachers to take their eye off the ball. And when the teachers see the students getting ready to go to the library for their coding class, how excited they are, and they're talking and just can barely contain themselves. Then when they come back, they're really excited and still talking about the project they were working on. The classroom teachers start to say, "What are they doing in there? Because whatever they're doing, I wish I had that same when I'm teaching math. I wish I had that same level of excitement and enthusiasm."
Right.
And then what we see in those districts where they've decided not to have the teachers in professional development, very often that's the next thing they think about is, how do we get more classroom teachers? And they'll typically take the ones that are volunteering, the ones that say, I've heard that it's not that hard to learn because I've talked to some of my colleagues and I know how excited the students are. Can I get that training?" A good district will, rapidly encourage those early adopters to come on board. And then eventually, I mean, someday, maybe a generation from now, every elementary teacher will get coding in their pre-service work, even if they've elected to be an elementary teacher.
Right. And talking about pedagogically, what do you need to know to do this in a classroom setting rather than just taking a class on the content area? So like a CS 101 course or something like that, and then not have any application of, well, what would learning C++ have anything to do with working with a kindergartner?
Well, yeah, and it probably wouldn't have anything, right?
Right.
But yeah, if they can take it in the context of how to be a more effective elementary teacher, then I think it would make a real difference. And we're starting to see that a little bit around the country with some of the pre-service programs, but I anticipate that will grow over time.
Yep. So if you can wave like a magic wand and make a change in CS education, what change would you make?
I know what I would say, so I'll say what I'm thinking, even though it may not be popular.
Mm-hmm.
I would actually like it to be a mandatory subject. And I say that with some hesitation because, for example, in the United Kingdom, it is. And there's a goal that at a certain point in the very near future that every student will have an opportunity to get computer science in every grade and every class. So I like it because that does kind of force the issue, and it also would cause people to pay attention and think about it more seriously. The other part of me is I never like to be told what to do. And so if somebody mandates something, I mean, I'm probably one of those that's, going to be resistant just out of principle,
Yeah.
Being forced to do something. And so I kind of like the idea of a soft mandate, meaning this is who we are, and let's say it's at a district level. This is who we are. We think these kinds of skills are essential for our students to gain, and this literacy is essential for them to have. And so we want to give them every opportunity. And we also want to demonstrate to our building level principals and to our teachers and to our staff that this is part of who we are and what we do. And also we're going to provide you with the resources you need to be successful. And typically that starts with good professional development and professional learning opportunities. But it could be something as simple as we're going to, cover the cost of your substitute so you can get that training.
Right.
Or we're going to make sure that we have enough devices for teachers that want to integrate this into the regular curriculum. Or it could be something as simple as, we'll give you a designation or a certificate or a small stipend for completing the training because it's important to us and we want to show you that kind of support. So it doesn't have to be a budget breaker for a district at all. And often what we see is it really is a visionary leader or a group of leaders at a school district who see that and say, I want to make sure that I'm providing appropriate support to those teachers who are learning this. And then by doing that, our students will gain a literacy and a set of skills and abilities that they might not otherwise have.
So there has been some concerns from administrators regarding the budgets. So, what have some of the visionaries and thought leaders that you've spoken with or worked with done to kind of find some funding for doing that professional development or the substitute costs or device costs or whatever? Like, how could districts get started if they currently don't have the funding?
Well, and it's interesting. I'll give you a couple of responses to that. I was talking to a CS education leader in Texas, and somebody brought up the funding obstacle, we'll call it, and she said, if you just look around at all of the marching bands we have in Texas and how much money they spend on instruments and uniforms and competitions and everything else, don't tell me there's not money to be found in the budget for computer science education. So one of the responses is sort of a priority question, and I'm all for marching bands, having been a former marching band member myself. But the point being, you've got to set priorities as a district, and then that may be reallocating some of your general budget money towards computer science education. The second thing that we see, I'll give you one that's obvious and one that's not so obvious. The obvious one we see is there are many states around the country whose legislatures are now appropriating funds specifically for computer science education. And sometimes it's a more open-ended grant in the form of you can use this for professional development or devices or covering administrative expenses if you need to hire someone else at the district level, or here's some money to do some planning, some strategic planning around computer science. So those are clear opportunities where funds have been earmarked specifically for computer science education, and districts can apply for those and then have the funding to be able to do it. The other one that's not so obvious to us, but I have seen it happen. Occasionally, I'm privy to the internal conversations that take place at districts where they are getting creative about how they're going to find funding to be able to do this. And so I've heard some districts say, we've got some Title I money that I think would apply to this. Mm. Or we've got some Title II funds that I think we could designate towards this computer science education. Or there was one district that said, we have a Mexican arts grant. It's broad enough that if we could integrate coding into art, there might be a way that we could, earmark some of those funds or use some of those funds to support a computer science initiative at our school. Mm. And then there's other places, Utah comes to mind because I was on a school community council there. And the legislature has set aside funds for each local school community council to be able to give teacher or classroom grants or sometimes school level grants for certain things to happen. A school that doesn't have the funding may say, well, there's some opportunities there with the school community council grant fund to do something. We've also seen, and in fact, I met with somebody from Donors Choose last week when I was in Washington, D.C., and there are a lot of teachers that are either acquiring curriculum resources, sometimes they're acquiring robots and other things to help in their individual classroom. And I talked to them about, are there things that you do on a broader scale where, let's say, a district wants to do something like professional learning, or they want to increase the number of devices they have so the students can go one-to-one? It could be something beyond what just an individual classroom or teacher might want. And there are some of those opportunities out there. And so I think if a district really wants to do it, that there are some opportunities for funding. And one of the other things that we're involved with is we just recently entered a relationship with Amazon Future Engineer, where they're providing the funding to allow us to go into districts around the country. And the priority is for districts that have high needs, so high free and reduced lunch or high poverty or high Title I, high minority areas, to bring opportunities for good quality professional learning to districts that may not otherwise be able to afford it. And so these are in places where they may not have a state grant. They may not have a generous foundation. They may not have access to other corporate resources. And so this is a great way. And right now, between now and the end of March, districts around the country can apply for that Amazon Future Engineer Boot Up grant by going to our website. And so that's one thing that we see as a real opportunity to close some of the equity gaps that we see around the country.
And I love that we're basically able to continue providing the same PD we've been doing, but essentially giving it to a district as an award.
Yeah, and I'll just use one example. I visited about a year and a half ago with the administrators at the Atlanta Public Schools. We were talking about this, and the reception was, "Oh, this is great, but does it cost anything?" And I said, "Well, typically districts will pay us for our services to come in and do the professional development." And the administrator I was meeting with said, "Well, unless it's free or practically free, and it's really good, we probably won't be able to do it because all of our schools are charter schools.
Hmm.
They all have their own governing boards, and they if we do anything from the district office level, it has to be pretty low cost to the schools, and it has to be good. Otherwise, they can choose not to do it." For me, this is a classic example of where the Amazon Future Engineer Boot Up initiative really can come into play, because now we can offer our services to a district like Atlanta that has those high needs and significant equity gaps, and bring it to their students at a cost that's very low. So districts are typically under this grant, they're not paying for boot up services at all. They might cover the cost of substitutes. They might provide lunches or other things during professional development, but it's a really low point of entry for a district to really get some good support.
So I know in the last couple of weeks in particular, you've traveled to several conferences and you've gone through well over 100 applications for various positions for working at Boot Up. I'm curious, how do you, as somebody who is very busy, take care of yourself or stave off burnout?
Well, I guess two things is, even if I'm traveling a lot, I try and be very careful about what I eat and what I drink. Very often, as I'm traveling to different places, I'll make a local stop to the grocery store,
Mm-hmm.
which is always healthier than trying to get something fast and cheap at a fast food place. So there's that, and then the other thing, and this is a really small thing, I have my favorite pillow that I take with me because I'm often sleeping in Airbnbs and hotels, and just being able to get a good night's sleep makes a big difference. And as far as burnout goes, right now, I mean, it's so exciting. So many really cool things are happening in computer science education, especially at the elementary level. Finding the motivation and finding the drive to keep going is not hard at all. There may come a time when it's just so overwhelming that I just say, I wish I could clone myself. But the beauty of that is, we have such great team members at Boot Up, and we're hiring for other positions right now, and the applicants that we're getting are just great people who have a passion for making a difference in the world. And that, as a nonprofit, we can be very mission driven. And the mission is to get kids coding, and we do that by empowering their teachers. And and then when you get to see the fruits of that, I mean, the evidence of that in the teachers that we work with and the students that they work with, the gratification is built right in. So that part's easy.
And one thing that I'll add, having had many conversations with Clark, is also following a lot of the methods that were mentioned in the interview with Dave Brichetti. So there's a lot of podcasts and books that are recommended in the show notes for that one, like Getting Things Done, which I know has been a huge impact on both Clark and I in terms of trying to make it so we can get through the actions that we have for the day without getting burned out doing too many things at once.
Yeah. Well, and I think the beauty of some of those tools is it's not only just creating a magnificent to-do list,
Mm-hmm.
but it's all about doing what gets you the best return on your investment of energy and time and passion.
Right.
And that's always a mix between some things just have to get done, and they may not be the things that you need the most, but they just have to happen. I mean, people have to get paid, benefits have to be administered, those kinds of things have to happen with precision. But at the same time, if I can focus my time, energies, and skills on doing something that has high value and high return, that's really the beauty of getting things done, and getting things done elegantly. Is that's kind of the essence of what we do.
You may have already answered this question earlier, but what do you wish there's more research on that could help districts with getting started in CS Ed?
Yeah, so I did mention the one that I think is really essential, and that is the impact of learning coding at a young age on academic performance in other subject areas. To me, that would be one that would gain a lot of attention, because then districts don't think, how can I fit one more thing into the day? It would be, I've got to make this happen because it's going to yield positive results. And then the second thing that, this one's much more difficult to quantify, but I think it's essential, because if you think about, if one of the purposes of education is to create a vibrant citizenry someday, that doesn't just mean, good productivity in the workplace. It means being good citizens and good human beings. I'd love to see, research and support for the proposition that learning this literacy at a young age, learning how to code and think computationally and collaborating and being creative, leads to a richer citizenry. And it may not be monetarily, it may be intellectually or socially. Um, you know, I, if such research could ever be done, it'd be nice to see something like that.
Do you have questions for myself or to the field?
Yeah, I guess a question for the field. I often get involved in these conversations, and it's usually with CTE directors or high school teachers or administrators that are thinking about career and college readiness. There's a lot of talk about how do we recruit students into computer science. So we already talked about the problems of trying to recruit teachers into computer science, and my response is, don't recruit them, grow them. But the power of introducing this at the elementary level, when all students get it during the school day, you create a new opportunity and or problem for yourself, and that is, what am I going to have for them in middle school, junior high, and high school if they're coming into those environments with several years of coding and computational thinking experience. I've got to think very differently about what offerings that I make. And I think that would be a really good problem to have.
Mm.
So I guess, and a lot of the computer science teachers, the ones who call themselves computer science teachers, are at the secondary level, the 9 through 12 typically. I'd like to have them think more broadly that, this kind of literacy and these kind of skills are for everyone, and not just high performing students that elect it in, junior high or high school. Or that we're selecting out the cream of the crop to take computer science. I'd really like to see this be much more egalitarian and much more equitable in the way that those opportunities are presented. And we see, if you're thinking about the pipeline, and whether that's a pipeline to jobs, some of which will be very computer programming intensive, but others may not be at all. But having that literacy and understanding is still going to be important no matter what career you go into. Having them think about the power of introducing it at the elementary level is something I think I'd like the field to think about and keep working on.
Mm-hmm.
Much easier to recruit some students into your junior high elective computer science class if they've all had coding for several years in elementary school. Then it's really like, how am I going to find enough teachers to staff all of the need that I have? Or in some states we've seen, it's no longer an elective; it's actually going to be a requirement. And if that's the case, if it's a required middle school class in computer science, then you've already got the staffing thing to be thinking about. But then secondly, you've got to think about the knowledge base that the students are coming in with.
Right. Yeah, it completely changes things when, at least in high school, when I took C++ course, it was assumed that we had zero prior coding experience or computer science experience. But if you have kids going through K through 6 or K through 8 and coding every single year, you're going to have to revamp your high school classes to account for that. So that'll be an interesting dilemma a lot of districts are going to have to work through.
Yeah. Well, and when you come right down to it, it is an equity issue.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, you have great elementary computer science teachers but there's maybe one in a district or two in a district. They're not doing the same thing consistently. And so if you have a student who just happened to be in that teacher's class in first grade, and they got introduced to Scratch Junior and are doing some really cool things, and maybe they've had a little bit of robotics, and then they go to second grade and the teacher says, "Oh, I want to start something with coding." Well, the kids that I had the teacher the year before are like, "Well, we already did this." And the other students that didn't have that teacher, weren't fortunate enough to have that teacher, all of a sudden they're like, we didn't know this." You've created inequity without really trying to,
Hmm.
just by having, one teacher in isolation doing it in a district or in a school. And what we see is it really gets powerful when all the teachers are on board and doing similar things and reinforcing each other from grade to grade, and being a lot more conscious about where the students have been and where they're going.
Right.
And the other thing that happens when with the current model we see in a lot of districts is that one teacher who's amazing at coding and computer science, and maybe they've got a little robotics club or whatever, they leave, they move on to a position in administration or the district office, the program is gone.
Right.
And that's really sad to see that. It could be a fabulous program that's really a showcase for the district, but then that one teacher moves on. It's over, and we've got to create more sustainable structures and systems.
Yeah, I would have been a reviewer for the Teaching Excellence in Computer Science Awards, or whatever it's called, for the last few years. And one of the criteria that has been, at least on the recent reviews, is how sustainable are your efforts in terms of, okay, this is great that you're having this awesome impact in the field of computer science through education, but is it 100% reliable on you, or are you building up some sort of infrastructure so that when you leave, it can continue after you're gone?
Exactly. And yeah, and too often that is so difficult. I mean, some of these really good model teachers that we've met, they try and get their colleagues involved in it. They can see that it's bringing attention to that teacher or that classroom or that school, and they try and get other people involved. Without sort of district vision and district support, it's really hard to make that happen.
Right.
And so it's too often, the rule rather than the exception that the program withers once that teacher has moved on.
Where could people go to connect with you and the organizations you work with, or to learn more about the Amazon Future Engineers plus Boot Up initiative?
Okay, so if you go to the bootuppd.org website, a couple of things there. One is right there on the first page between now and the end of March is information about the Amazon Future Engineer Boot Up initiative, where you can just click on the apply now, start an application. No cost to apply, very simple to apply. We'd love to see a lot of districts do that. Second thing you'll see is if you click on the curriculum tab, and Jared could certainly tell you all about this, but if you click on the curriculum tab, you will see free, incredible resources, not only for teachers, but for students. So this is really student-facing curriculum with video support, coder resources, lots of extension activities, and almost every lesson has multiple debugging activities where students can try and fix the code that something's wrong with the code. Those resources are available for free for anyone. And the great news is that more and more people around the world are using those resources because of their quality and because of their comprehensiveness. And so we encourage people to take a look at those resources. And you can also get in touch with any of us via that website, with questions or comments or feedback. We strive to do better every day and would love to get your input.
And with that, that concludes this episode of the CSK8 podcast. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you consider sharing it with other administrators. Just a friendly reminder that the show notes can be found by clicking in the description in the app that you're listening to this on, or by visiting jaredoleary.com and clicking on the CSK8 podcast page. Now, next week, I unpack some scholarship. I'm going to actually be talking about the CS Visions framework, which has been put out by CSforALL. And then the following week, I'm actually going to interview 2 out of the 3 authors of that paper. So stay tuned for the next couple of weeks for some awesome Unpacking Scholarship episode and interview. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to this episode. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will talk to you later.